Did we have a specific state? Okay. Send me that'd be nice. I can fly it. Yeah. Well, I'm Grady G. You can my time. Yeah, true. Be everywhere. Yeah, I mean, so you're gonna be the one introducing me, right? Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I'm introducing myself. Okay, awesome.
Hello, hello. Can you all hear me? Hello? Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me back there? All right. Hey guys, thank you so much for coming. I'm Kennedy Wilkinson, and we're just so excited to have you here and be a part of this event. Quickly, Pete is going to come up here and talk about Silent Majority Foundation. So we basically partnered with them on this event to bring awareness to what the state of Washington is doing, specifically with medical freedom. But we're so excited to have you guys. So please enjoy the food. And also, owners, Grandma Colleen Snyder, graciously donated the appetizers and the space for this evening. So please show them some love. And please order a meal, order a glass of wine or two, and enjoy the evening.
Thanks, Kennedy. As she said, my name is Pete Serrano. I am one of the directors of Silent Majority Foundation. We are a Washington-based nonprofit organization where we educate, advocate, and litigate. Unfortunately, a lot of what's going on throughout our states, specifically that garbage that comes from Olympia, requires litigation. So we are almost right now exclusively litigation. I do want to introduce some of our team. Again, We are a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Pasco. So I'd like to introduce one of our other directors, Rob Waits, who is getting food. That's his favorite place. And his wonderful wife, Randy, right next to him. And my wife, PJ, who I couldn't do this without. This is Max, he's our youngest of 3 and 4. And then I'm going to turn a couple quick minutes over to Karen Osborne, whose awesome husband Bill is right next to her. You can raise your hand. Yeah, dude, the wave. Karen has been a blessing. We've had some folks that have actually come down. She's come across from Camas, Washougal, Vancouver, whatever you want to call that area. And some other folks who came in tow as well. And they were talking about Scott Miller, who was subjected to similar disciplinary action from the state board. And Karen and I had the blessing to work on Scott's case last year. And these are the real heroes. Rick, Scott, saving hundreds of thousands of people from a disease that, we could get into whether or not it should have ever existed or its intention or et cetera, et cetera. And we probably don't need to go there tonight because it would be a week-long seminar. But with a disease with no early intervention, or at least allegedly no intervention, Rick and Scott were out there putting their credentials on the line to treat. So I'll have Karen talk a little bit about her medical background, her interest in fighting for medical freedom, and then when we get back over, I'll give a little bit more overview of Silent Majority Foundation and some exciting stuff we did today. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see all of you here. This is a very important subject that we all really need to face. When I was growing up, my dad was a pharmacist. And as a pharmacist, he taught us that although medications are there for a very good reason, they should be a last resort. That medications always have issues that go along with them, and they can be very helpful, but they can also be very harmful. Well, that was good training for today, I think. When I first was in college, as right out of high school, I started in nursing. My first rotation in nursing was at a hospital, and right away I began to see how bad it was and how poorly patients were treated and thought of by the medical professions. So I didn't end up finishing nursing, I didn't end up ever practicing. But then Bill and I got married and I had children and raised them, homeschooled them, and then decided I was going back to law. Well, then 2020 happens, right? Here I am, just starting out as a lawyer. I'm actually doing estate planning, although I planned on doing constitutional law. And 2020 happened. So obviously I decided I needed to get back into public interest law because I began seeing how poorly the whole pandemic policy was being rolled out. It was obvious to me that although they said follow the science, they weren't. It was obvious to me that they desperately wanted to take away all of our rights to informed consent. It was obvious to me that there were 1,001 things that we could do and should be doing and should be told to do that they weren't telling us to do, like going outside and exercising instead of saying stay home and stay huddled. Go out, take vitamin D or go get it in the sunshine. Oh no, that would be terrible. You're going to overdose on vitamin D. Take vitamin C. Oh no, vitamin C doesn't do anything. All of these recommendations that should have just been obvious, they were saying, oh no, there's no science behind them. It was, I was thoroughly disgusted. And it was clear that people were not being informed. And if you're not informed, if you're not given the information, you can't make an informed choice. Informed consent does not exist. And so then when they started rolling out the vaccine mandates, that's when I said, well, that's it. I've got to find someone I can work with. So I searched and searched and searched to find partners that I could work with, and I finally found a couple. He joined with the team that represented Scott Miller in Canvas, who he was another one who was just out there doing what he could for people. Tons of people out of the hospital. I can't even tell you everything he did. He was up day and night for months helping people, and now he's lost his license. We did what we could, but there was only so much we could do in regard to this medical commission. But in the process of representing Scott, I met Pete, and so had the opportunity then to represent Dr. Wilkinson. This is so important. In World War II, I don't know if any of you understand, after World War II, the Nuremberg Code was written, and that was written for a reason. It was written because we can't ever be forced to take medical interventions. Unfortunately, our government is at it again. And it's not, the sad part is that our government, through history, has been culpable in this regard before, and they're doing it again. And we can't let this continue. That's why this is so important to me. I want very much to help people like Dr. Wilkinson, but it goes beyond him. It touches all of us. If we can be forced to take medical interventions or lose our job, then there's nothing that they can't do to us. Nothing. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you for supporting this cause. It is of utmost importance, and I just appreciate that you're all here.
Thank you, Karen. When we talk about a blessing, let me give a broader picture of Silent Majority Foundation. I mentioned we're a nonprofit organization, and our fundamental goal is to restore the Constitution of the United States of America and of the state of Washington, but with the focus that it initially had, which was that upward of God. Our fundamental focus is to make sure that the people are reliant on God, and obviously we can't compel that, but utilizing the Constitution and its principles and its foundations of sovereignty, not of just a nation, but of a people that respect and revere God. And so, obviously we're a nonprofit, we're not a denominational church. That's for each individual, but we are looking upwards always. We lift each other up in prayer. We start our staff meetings in prayer. I mentioned Rob. He was there with me, and unfortunately he's had to suffer me through, I guess I'll call it a friendship, I don't know what he calls it, for several years, working out in his garage in the pandemic, complaining about my kids and his kids suffering, looking for literally one night, where are the attorneys? God said, there's one looking at you. Okay, well, what do you want me to do? So we helped with a recall of Jay Inslee that wasn't successful, but we were able to help draft several of the charges. We were actually able to litigate it. We actually brought it forward. And I remember the judge looking at me and saying, Mr. Serrano, where's the intent that Jay Inslee had to usurp your rights and take them away? And I said, well, let me tell you a story. Pete and Rob, or Pete and Bob, another guy who's a neighbor, go to church together. They can not worship together. If you recall, early 2020, couldn't worship together if you weren't from the same household. But we could go to the store together. We could go do lots of things together. But as soon as we put on worship music, we were quote unquote worshiping in that vehicle that was permissible. Magically, an invisible COVID line hit. I said, Your Honor, if that's how Jay Inslee is deciding when COVID is going to enter into my body, I think he's intentionally violating my rights. And of course, so that's a good point, but Thank you. Unfortunately, but that led us into a lot of other things. We started with, we're down in, like I said, we're in Tri-Cities, 317 hamper workers. That was our first case. Filing on that case, and we're still litigating that 2 years later. We actually have oral arguments in front of the Ninth Circuit up in Seattle, May 8th, so what is that, a week and a half out. Like Karen mentioned, thanks to God, she and I were able to be part of a team that helped come full circle, that we were able to represent Rick 3 weeks ago for a week-long hearing. We've evolved into making sure that you have the ability to protect yourself. We filed on behalf of Scott Brumback, an attorney here in town, in that courthouse, literally over there. And we're still waiting on an opinion from Judge Denke as to whether or not it's lawful for you to possess and carry larger than 10-round magazines. We had that case heard the day before Thanksgiving, and I said, I entered with, I'd like to thank God and the creators of this wonderful nation for instituting a constitution that looks towards him and protects our rights. And that's how I wanted to litigate that case. And I said, Scott, I don't know if it's going to do any favors, but listen, man, we can't be here the day before Thanksgiving and not recognize God and not recognize the founders. And so everything we do is looking towards that and trying to rebuild our nation piece by piece, because it's been destroyed so easily, so fundamentally. But I tell you this, Rob and I, we were just talking about this. We literally came from Grant County. Why? Because we were filing to challenge House Bill 1240, which is so-called an assault weapons ban. It's not an assault weapons ban. It's a firearms ban, and it's a way that James Lee and these cronies continue to keep control of us. And so we were in Grant County this afternoon, but the point of that story is we were talking, and we've literally crisscrossed the state in the past 2 years. The Silent Majority Foundation has existed, and we do it because we have to go everywhere we can to let people know that you are the silent majority. We chose the name so that people could feel and sympathize and be part of it. The goal is to change the name to Majority Foundation, get people to be the loud majority, so we don't have to be silent. But listen, we stand in your place. When we file these cases, again, we do it with a prayer in heart and with the intent to not just impact my rights or Rob's rights or my wife's or my kids' rights, but to do it so that each one of us can live freely and that we can live under the constitutional republic that was intended, that does exist, and we're pulling it back out of the hands of those who are willing to take it apart piece by piece. And again, a year or so ago, we were blessed that I think it was Rick that called, or no, it was the other Rick that called us, right? I think that's how we got introduced, or was it, and maybe, but anyway, someone in Yakima, I think, reached out and said, hey, what's going on with these medical licensing? And so, well, we're working on one of those cases, we'll come up and talk to you. So we had a wonderful sit down, and there were 7 or 8 medical professionals. Some are conveniently retired now. It's easier to go. It's easier, and look, I pass no judgment. I'm the idiot that mid-pandemic quit a successful career to start a nonprofit. You know, ask my wife how that works out, because I got a 4-year-old here that's probably eating off the ground. We'd be doing that at home, but, you know, at least it's less fancy at home. You know, but God's got a mission for each one of us. I want to be clear about that, for each one of us. I don't know what yours is, I know what mine is. I've taken my role and it's been terrifying. It's been frightening. I've been way out of my comfort zone, doing things way over my head that people way smarter or more capable than I should be doing. But they're not. So God's using those gold tools that he has that say, I will be your hands. And we were blessed to be part of Rick's team. And I know he wants to tell and has the ability to tell his story, which is amazing because he too stepped out of the comfort zone and said, who am I? Send me, I will save people. We don't do so much, you know, the physical saving, but we do intend to save this story. So God bless you. I'm sure, you know, Q&A, Karen and I will be around after Rick tells his story. If you have questions for us, don't hesitate to ask. There's a lot to be told. I do want to, before I end, this is one thing that Rob and I and DJ have gotten involved in. And this is not specifically to the foundation. There's a thing called the Founders Bible. I sit on Pasco City Council, and I heard that in the Tri-Cities there was a drag queen story hour type thing. I was correct that didn't happen, but regardless, there's something of that. And I said to the gentleman who runs the library, I said, hey, well, tell me about this. You're asking for funding from a perspective of a public servant who's gotten a lot of phone calls about this. I want to know what happened. And so he told me about it. He said, well, Mr. Serrano, why don't you bring something that might be equally offensive to other people from a different perspective? And I said, okay. One rule is I'm stupid enough that you don't challenge me, because I rise to that and I rise against it. In fact, one of the early lawsuits, our current mayor said, Mr. Serrano, you want to open Pasco, why don't you sue Jay Ainsley? Guess what, 2 months later, there's a lawsuit. And so I show you the Bible because I've said this, and I want this to be heard everywhere. As we were praying about what to do about that, the thought of don't go protest, displace evil with light. How do you do that? You bring God to the place where darkness exists. And so we brought the Founders Bible. We have a monthly Bible study. We picked the largest. It's 140 seating capacity in Kennewick, so that's the largest in the Tri-Cities. And we've been on there every month for the past 3 months. And I encourage each one of you, if that's your thing, don't do your Bible study at home. Don't do it at your church. Do it at the library. Go to the public places. And I rest assured, you can contact us if they tell you you cannot do it there. I will drop. Someone else can fight for your gun rights. I'll fight for your gun rights. And that's what we'll do. Your free speech, your ability to worship that exists, it's coextensive with the public places that you and I pay for. We will be here. I assure you that. I won't come to your rallies. I got lawsuits to write. But we will be the ones to file those lawsuits. So, all right, I encourage you strongly to think about the use of public spaces and how you can better those by displacing evil with light. And I encourage you to pray on that. Again, I don't know who in here has that mission. Someone probably does, or you know someone that does. Go after it. Call us if you have troubles. God bless. To the man of the hour, Dr. Ray Wilkinson.
I would like to be clear that, in my opinion, I am not the man of the hour. These guys are the people of the hour because they're the ones that make it. 3 weeks ago, we were in the midst of a court case. Every day I drove down to the Tri-Cities and we went to Pete's office. And Karen and I and Pete would join together and we would have this very special time with the court, the Washington State Court. Sitting there with the judge, the Assistant Attorney General, and 3 jurors, I guess is what they would be, seemed in some ways to be kind of ominous, but because I was there with these 2 terrific attorneys, I really felt very much at peace. One of the things that really helped me feel at peace was that every morning before we began the day in the court session, we would bow and have a time of prayer together. So when Pete is saying that prayer is important, we need to pray, it wasn't just talk, it was actually, this is what we did. And to me, that was a very, very special and supportive part of the time we spent together. Just having that time of prayer this time of turmoil helped to bring a great deal of calmness. I wasn't entirely calm, but there was certainly a whole lot more peace and calmness because of the time we spent together in prayer. I want to be clear about something. I'm going to tell you a bit of the story of struggling with Goliath. But this evening, again, is really not about me, nor about my experience with the state. To me, the big thing is that there are people here who are to defend you and me and the Constitution and those things which we, I think all of us, consider to be of great value. I know Kennedy had told me when she was working on putting this thing together, one of her statements was, I don't want my kids growing up in a communist country, and that's why I'm working to help do these things. And I appreciate that, Kennedy. That was very As you know, the Silent Majority Foundation is working not only so that you can have access to doctors who practice the way that you like and that you believe in. It's also so that you can bear arms and so you can have the Constitution continuing to function in our time. And as you know, we're starting to lose some of those privileges, those things that are supposed to be things we were born with. In my opinion, it should be your right to seek medical input and care from a doctor that might disagree with Jay Inslee and Bill Gates. I wish there were more of them, but I think there will be as time goes along. I know about medicine and treating the sick, but I know nothing about courts and technicalities of the law. When Pete and Karen and Silent Majority saw what the state was doing to a well-intentioned, honest doctor, they came alongside of me and promised to do all they could to protect me and in some ways you from the onslaughts of a wicked state. I can't tell you how much I've appreciated their willingness to join me in fighting that tyranny. I'm going to tell you a bit of the story of what happened during that trial, but this evening, again, is really about those amazing attorneys. It's not about my trial there. They have many, many more great things to do. God bless them. And I really want to thank Graham Schneider for his willingness to give us the space, to provide the food. I mean, what a great guy and great team. Thank you guys. In the summer of 2020, I believe, might have been spring, somewhere in that time frame, somebody sent me a link to a YouTube where the guy who was the chief medical officer of the Memorial Hospital Group was interviewed. And in this interview, one of the reporters asked him, what about those doctors who are using ivermectin in treating COVID? Because he was discussing the big problem with COVID. So his comment went something like this. Yes, we have heard that there are some doctors who have been using ivermectin. It is a problem, and we will be doing what we need in order to stop the use of that treatment. So that for me was a little bit of a sit-up call. It was a wake-up. I'm thinking, I've seen a lot of things about the benefits of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Why is the head of the hospital, the chief medical officer, talking about how terrible it is? So I realized that I had to make a decision about what I was going to do. Was I going to bow to Jay or to the head of the medical group at the hospital? Or was I going to do something different? So I really seriously began working in a lot more intensely to try to find what the data was. And if I had, I'm not going to read all those things just in case anybody's worried, but I got 3 ring binder after 3 ring binder after 3 ring binders, big 3 inches, and filled with various documents because I wanted to find out what is the evidence, what is the truth on this issue, which might be important in the lives and health of many different people. So I've gone through hundreds of documents, and the data just keeps getting stronger and stronger that ivermectin, among other things, is a really good thing. So I used it. According to the Hippocratic Oath, which is theoretically something that doctors take at one point or the other, in the Hippocratic Oath, it says, I will use those protocols which benefit my patients according to my best ability and judgment. According to my best ability and judgment. Not Jay Ensley's, not the head of the hospital's medical group, not the Attorney General, Jay Ensley's. Not Tony Fauci's. I mean, I understand he is science. He is the definition of science. But I don't care about that science. I want to look in a different direction. If you remember what the situation with COVID was like at that point in time, people were getting sick. I know here in Yakima, and I think this was true in many other areas, but people were getting sick and they would call up their doctor. Now, I don't know how many doctors responded this way. We heard it from the patients that we would see. They would call up their doctor and say, hey, doctor, I think I've got COVID. I need to come in and see you. Oh, don't come here. We don't have anything to do with that kind of stuff. And so they would go to the urgent care. And I don't know how much of the time they were sent away, but I know some of the time, because I've had patients tell me, oh, don't come here. Don't walk in there. If you're sick, go to the hospital, go to the ER. So people would go to the ER. In the ER, according to some, we were the busiest hospital in the state. If that's true, I know that at times there were virtually 100 people in the waiting room and in the emergency room, and there were only, I think, 23 or 25 rooms in the ER. So a lot of people sitting around. And so they would say, okay, well, what do I do? My doctor won't see me, urgent care won't see me, the emergency room is filled up, I'll just go home and hope I get better. And they would get worse. They go into the emergency room, they'd say, yes, you have COVID, but you're not sick enough to admit, so go home. I mean, they did nothing. Now later, they began giving 1 dose of dexamethasone, occasionally maybe something else, but basically nothing was done to people until they got so sick they had to go into the hospital. Because of that challenge, we started getting a lot of calls. And I've got a great team, some really, really wonderful women who work with me at the clinic. And so I'd ask, are you guys willing to stay late? Are you willing to see patients a lot later than what we normally would? And they were always willing to stick around and willing to work to help people who were sick and needed help. So, there's Katie and Miranda.
She's on the other side of the road.
So before reviewing the state's case against me, I'll review just a little bit of the 50-plus page letter that I wrote to the state. So in the summer of 21, I got a letter from the state, summer or fall, and the state said that they were after me, that they had complaints from the hospital. It turned out that all the complaints were from the hospital, or at least somebody related to the hospital. Which goes back to what I had seen on that YouTube when the chief medical officer said we're going to be going after people who actually use some of these other treatments. So I got the letter, and so I wrote this long letter to the board, and basically what I said is something like this. I am treating patients the best that I know how. I have studied this extensively. I've put a lot of time into it. But if there is a better way, if you're worried about the people who I would be treating, come sit down with me. I'm willing to learn. Show me where there's a better way. Show me the data that says this is a better way to treat. If you're really worried about patients, come talk to me. You know what I heard from them on that? Nothing. And I did that more than once. And in my newsletters, which are on our blog, I would frequently place in what I wrote. I said, this is the way I understand things. And if anybody at the state disagrees with me, please come and talk. I'm very happy to be shown that I'm wrong. And if you can show me that I'm wrong, I will write emails, I will write newsletters, I will let people know that I was wrong and this is a better way to do it. But again, did anybody ever do that? No. And so for me, I have a hard time seeing this as being a genuine concern regarding the patient care that I was providing. So I also want to be clear, I tried to do this all in a very positive way. So when I began writing to the state, I said, look guys, it was a little more formal than that, but look guys, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. If a doctor is drunk and goes into surgery and cuts off the wrong leg, somebody needs to deal with that doctor. And I appreciate what you guys do. If somebody is sexually doing things against patients, that doctor needs to be dealt with. So I support what you're doing. If I'm doing something wrong, please show me where I'm wrong and teach me. But that's where nothing happens. So did the state theoretically concerned about the dangerous treatment if people lift a finger to help me find a better and more effective way to treat? No, nothing at all. So it came down to trial, and the issues that the assistant attorney general of the state, who was the prosecutor in this case, what she seemed to think was important were several things. But one of the things that was interesting was watching her in the way that she dealt with people. So for the first 2 days, she had her witnesses. So those were the people at the hospital who had complained about me. And then she had her people who were experts. And it was interesting to observe her. I thought this was just maybe the way she was. So she had spent, I believe, a fair bit of time getting coached on how to behave in front of the TV camera or the camera on her computer. And when she was working in the first 2 days with these various ones, it was always this kind of, oh, you're so smart. That's great. Now, she didn't really say that. But I mean, it was that kind of attitude. The sense you got was, oh, you are the greatest person in the world on the subject. And so, you know, if she's their witness, their expert, it's kind of a nice way to keep them going. But what's very interesting is when it came to our people, our witnesses, it was a totally different attitude. I mean, she sat way back in her chair, slumped her arm over like that. Well, what do you know? And so it was interesting, this different attitude that she took. So the first thing that they complained about was that I had in one of my newsletters, I discussed masks and the tremendous benefit of masks around the time of COVID. Well, if you're sick and you're coughing and sputtering, you should stay home. But if you have to be out for some reason, it's probably a good idea to wear a mask so you're not coughing into other people's face. But for me to wear a mask, we never wore masks in our office. Unless we did have a few times a person who came in to see me and they were frightful, they were scared, they were afraid, and they asked if I would wear a mask. I said, sure, yeah. You asked me to wear a mask, I'm happy to wear a mask. Jay asked me to wear a mask, I'm not interested. So what we did was I wrote a letter about the masks, a newsletter, and I said that the way we're using masks probably not going to be very helpful. And then I had a letter that was written by a guy by the name of Russell Blaylock. Did any of you ever heard of Russell Blaylock? He's a great guy. He's a neurosurgeon. He's written for 20 years a newsletter on health issues and diet and supplements and so forth. And so he wrote a very nice newsletter on masks, and so I put his data in. His conclusion went, it is evident from this review that there is insufficient evidence that wearing a mask of any kind can have a significant impact in preventing the spread of this virus. It's interesting. He says there's no data that shows that wearing a mask does anything at all to help. Now, somebody could say, well, he's just a crazy radical. He's just a neurosurgeon from the South. What does he know? Fair enough. Except that, have any of you ever heard of the Cochrane Review? Some of you have. That is a kind of, supposed to be independent way of looking at medical issues. And so it looks at, are these drugs good or are they not good? Is this good? Is that not good? And they give a relatively independent view. They just came out with the Cochrane Review on wearing masks in time of COVID. And they said almost word for word exactly what he said. There is no evidence that it does any good. Well, then the Assistant Attorney General had her comments to make it sound as though, well, they don't really know what they're talking about there, it's misuse or something, but it's what it says. So that was one of the things that they complained about. I hope we gave adequate response, but the second thing is that the state, this is very interesting. The state had at least, I think, 2 experts testify that ivermectin did absolutely nothing. So these people were given quite a bit of time to talk about it. And they repeatedly were asked, does ivermectin do any good? Oh, no, we thought at first maybe it would, but there is no evidence whatsoever. There's no reason to use ivermectin at all. And so this was the consistent testimony of the experts. So what does one do? I have patient after patient, people that I actually know and work with, who tell me that ivermectin saved their life. Now, whether that is to be taken literally or metaphorically, I don't know. But people feel like it helps them. And I can tell you story after story after story where that's the case. So one of the questions is, do I believe what I see and what people tell me, or do I believe what the expert at the University of Washington tells me is the truth? So I had scads of articles that I pulled out. Okay, maybe they're telling the truth, but let me just see. So let me run through just real fast, just a few. These are just basically headlines. So, title, use of ivermectin is associated with lower mortality in hospitalized patients with COVID-19. This is in Chest Journal. Now, this is a big name journal. And the conclusion was, ivermectin was shown to inhibit severe acute respiratory syndrome, COVID virus 2 replication. Okay, so those are a lot of words. Basically, it says that it had lower mortality during treatment of COVID-19, especially with patients who had significant pulmonary involvement. Okay, I mean, I wouldn't base everything on one article, but that's one article. Here we have a more complicated article. Ivermectin was found to be one of the most promising drugs. Our results suggest that it should be used in different ways and so forth. So, I mean, this was in vitro, that was in the laboratory, but there is good evidence that it looks like it helps. Here is another one where they looked at ivermectin, and so it keeps in the laboratory, ivermectin keeps the COVID virus from replicating. That's kind of what we want to do. We want that not to keep replicating. So ivermectin does that. Do all of you know what H. pylori is?
Sure.
Yep.
So for many years, so this goes back a little ways, but in the probably, I'm guessing, 90s, there was a guy in Australia who discovered what was causing most stomach ulcers. It used to be thought stomach ulcers were because of worry. You're just too stressed. Then it was discovered because of his work that there is a bug called H. pylori, or Heliobacter pylori, which has a little corkscrew kind of shape to it, and it goes into the wall of the intestines, the wall of the stomach and the esophagus, and it can create ulcers. So he got the Nobel Prize for his work. There was another guy, his name was Dr. Borody, Thomas Borody. He was another Australian who was a gastroenterologist. And even though this other guy had come up with H. pylori causing the problem, the other guy had no clue what to do to treat the H. pylori, which was causing so many of the ulcers and stomach problems. So Dr. Borody was a gastroenterologist. He came up with a protocol that used 3 different drugs and cured H. pylori most of the time. So he became very well known. He didn't get the Nobel Prize, but he did become very well known because of his work. He came out with a triple therapy for COVID. So guess what? This very well-known guy, guess what he came up with as a treatment for COVID? Ivermectin, zinc, and doxycycline. And he shows again and again and again how effective it is. The problem is it's very, very cheap therapy. Very cheap therapy. But, so here's another person doing work. I look at his work. That sounds good. Ivermectin for COVID-19 prophylaxis. This is from a major medical journal. Use of ivermectin in Peru resulted in an approximately 14-fold decrease in excess deaths. 14-fold. So, guess what the side effects are on ivermectin?
Weight loss.
Weight loss? Well, ivermectin, among other things, well, it's been interesting because one of the things we've learned with ivermectin is that we have a lot more parasites here in the States than we used to think we had. Because there are a lot of people we treat and their gut issues start clearing up. And then we treat them again. Anyway, I can go into that, but that's another story. Anyway, the use of decreased 14-fold. Here is the a guide to home-based COVID treatment. This is put out by the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons. I know that there are some of the doctors here in town who are actually members of that. Rick Edgerly is a member of it. In this, it talks about, well, what are some of the things that you should be able to use, and it includes ivermectin. These are good people. Effects of ivermectin in patients with COVID-19, a multi-center, double-blind, randomized controlled study. I mean, that's the kind that they want. So what does it show? A single dose of ivermectin was well tolerated in symptomatic patients with COVID-19. And important features of COVID-19 were improved with ivermectin use, including shortness of breath, cough, and low white blood cell count. So I was starting to tell you how safe ivermectin is. One of the people I was reading was saying ivermectin is about half as toxic as aspirin. Most people don't think very much about taking an aspirin or even a few aspirin for a while. And this is half as toxic according to that writer. So it's hard to get too excited about the potential downsides. We go through and explain to them what they might be. And if there's any problems, let us know. And one of the great stars was Dave Arnold. He's the guy who owns Medicine Marks. And what a champ he has been. He's provided people when you almost couldn't get ivermectin. I mean, I know people from Spokane were getting it through. We're lucky to have had men like that. He was one of our experts. Technically, he was an expert. He kind of was an expert. And, so I could go on, and I've got far more than what I've got here. FDA-approved drug ivermectin inhibits the replication of SARS-CoV-2 in vitro. It makes it so that it can't keep producing. And another thing that the state was complaining about was that, let me just get my, just to get my notes here. So, oh yeah, and so kind of wrap up the part on ivermectin. This is a listing of 100, and so this was in summer of 22. 175 ivermectin COVID-19 studies. And that was the complete listing, and almost all of them were very positive. There were occasional ones which came out and wasn't real positive, but almost everyone was positive. So the question for me is, why the opposition of the government to a safe, effective, proven remedy? And it's a whole lot safer than remdesivir. You all have heard about remdesivir. So let me just briefly touch on another thing they were worried about. I had talked about scam elements in a PowerPoint that I had given at one point. The state complained that I had used that term, and so I explained what I meant. The PCR test, you're all familiar with the PCR test. The PCR test was alleged to be a test to tell if a person had COVID or not. According to the man who got the Nobel Prize for discovering the technology, inventing the technology, he said you cannot use PCR testing in order to find out if a person is sick with any kind of virus. It doesn't tell you that. Now, some of you may already know that, but I think that's a pretty important thing. There's another part of it where what you do with COVID testing with PCR is you take the DNA or the RNA, there are ways of doing that, but you double it. That's one cycle. You double it again, that's 2 cycles. You double it again and keep going, doubling, doubling, doubling. So according to the more times you double it, the more likely you are to get a positive test. According to Fauci, science itself, I have a quote from him. Where he says that if you run the PCR test to 35 or more cycles, you have totally unimportant, you have no idea what the information actually is. Because you can find almost anything in anybody. You can pick up a childhood virus that you had when you were 3. It doesn't mean you're sick with that virus. It just means they found some of that virus. And so even Fauci said 34 is the max. If you have 35 or more, it's totally meaningless information. So I think it was Katie, somebody called the office, called the lab at the hospital and asked, how many cycles do you guys do? Guess what the number was? 40, 39? 100. Okay, it actually was 45. So what does that do? That gets you more positives. More people then are COVID positive. And what does that do to the bank account of the hospital? Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Now, I don't know what it was here in Washington State, but I do know Scott Jensen, who is a senator, state senator in Minnesota. In Minnesota, he said it was $13,000 extra for every positive COVID test. So when I was talking about the idea of there being a scam, it's not that there isn't COVID, it's not that people aren't getting sick, it's just that we're making people a lot sicker with COVID. We didn't have any flu in 2020. There was no flu, everybody had COVID. Is that reasonable? I don't think so. But the other thing about it is this. In many situations, if you died within 28 days of a positive test, you were said to have died because of COVID. I had a patient who came in and told me about his friend who was riding a motorcycle down the highway. Motorcycle went over, he's sliding down the highway and a semi ran over him. He died from COVID. That was on the death certificate because he had had a positive test within 28 days. So what does that do to the numbers? What does it do to the pandemic? How many people have COVID? And how many people are dying of COVID? More and more and more. So we tried to deal with some of that. I've got all sorts of articles I can talk about that. I think it's getting, I've gone too long, but we dealt a little bit with some of the other things, and I'll kind of wrap up here. Oh, let me just, this is kind of important. So here are articles. This is one that was in, I think it's a British journal, where it says that, let me first just explain. So you have the virus, and on the virus you have the spike protein. That's what made the COVID virus different from other coronaviruses that had the spike protein. The spike protein is what caused the problems. The spike protein caused the clotting, the endothelial damage, lung damage, clotting in the heart, clotting in other areas, and so forth and so on. So when they decided to make a vaccine, which isn't a vaccine, but nevertheless, when they decided to make a vaccine, what did they do? This is an entirely new technology. It's never been used in, well, it had been in a bunch of little babies, and many of them died, so they quit using it back then. But what they do is they take the messenger RNA, so the spike protein is a protein. That protein causes the damage. You make a protein in the body typically by a RNA, a messenger RNA comes from the nucleus, goes out, and it goes to a copying machine or a duplicator. It hooks up to that copying machine and says, this is the program, make a protein that has this sequence. So it makes that sequence. So what they did with the vaccine is they injected us with the messenger RNA for our cells to make the spike protein. So what's the pathological part of the COVID virus? The spike protein. What are we making? We're making the spike proteins. It's not terribly surprising that clotting, I mean, I had a patient in the other day that just what, 3 weeks, just before we had our thing down there, her leg is cut off, is amputated because right after she got the shot, she went into clotting and they had to take off her leg. One of the people that I worked with used to be the pastor of Karen and Bill, and he had the second Pfizer COVID shot on May 16, 2021, and he hasn't worked a day since. Now, Does everybody have problems? No, thank God. It's now coming out that about 4.7% of the batches actually cause the far and away majority of the damage. But personally, I don't want to take the chance. And I have worked with a lot of people who are very sick with COVID. I've been into the homes of people who are very sick with COVID. I've never had the COVID shot. I've never had COVID. You can do things to strengthen your body's immune system. You can prevent it. You can fight it. You start getting sick, there are things you can do to help you fight that. And so that tended to be more our focus. And let me just wrap up with, I don't think I need to convince you on the potential issues with COVID injections. I think somewhat, yeah. Well, have you all seen this book? It's Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022 by Edward Dowd. And this is a guy who is a hedge fund guy, and he made a lot of money with hedge funds. Not sure how you do that or how that all works, but nevertheless, that's what he did. Anyway, this company was taken over by BlackRock, and he quit and lives in Hawaii. And he, with being a hedge fund guy, you have to look at statistics. What do statistics tell you about where economies are going? And what do I want to invest in? And he began looking at this whole COVID thing, and he began to realize that if you want to invest, there are things to invest in. Mortuaries or funeral homes kind of things. And he has started investing, and he talks about the tragedy of numbers. The number of people, the death rates increasing between the age of 18 and 65, which typically are very healthy, low death rate. The death rates have gone up by around 40% since they started using the shot. Now, I don't know if that was a peak or it's continued, but I know there have been these monumental increases. So they didn't like, the state didn't like the fact that I wasn't encouraging people to take the COVID shots. And in my newsletter, I asked the question, should you take the COVID shot? And I said, stuff like, we used to be a free country, and it was your decision whether or not you wanted to take the shot. I think that's the way it should still be. And if you're asking me, I'm not taking the shot. Why? There are three reasons. The first is it is experimental, the shot. Number two, it is experimental. Number three, it is experimental. So we tried to present some of that data before the court. It was a little bit tighter, a little more constrained, and so forth. But nevertheless, I don't know what their take is going to be on it. But I can tell you that working with Pete and Karen and Rob on the side, you know, he was there and made a big, I mean, he's part of the team that put it together. It was terrific, thank you. It was really great. It was very encouraging to me. And it's great to be with fellow Christians who believe that God is present, is with us, and is going to be working for us. So we're waiting to see how God manifests in this. And doesn't mean everything's going to be great, but okay, then what's the next thing? If everything's great, okay, fantastic. So anyway, that's a little bit of the story. I think Karen and Pete, if you guys want to come up, and then if any of you have questions.
I'm so thankful that we have this guy who doesn't align himself with the corporate agenda, right? So, well, we're going to open it up for Q&A for a few minutes here. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and come on up. We have a wired mic here, so sorry we can't come to you. But.
can also read if somebody has one online.
Yes.
Okay.
What's the next step? The actual next legal technical step?
In his case?
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, we're 3 weeks out. Again, my calendar's smashed. We're roughly 3 weeks out. We anticipate an opinion somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. At that position, we will know what will happen. So for example, Scott Miller, there was a 25-page opinion. He talked about Kristen Brewer, the Assistant Attorney General, flops or smiles. She wrote a 20-page thesis on what she thought the punishment should be, whether or not they actually, so there's a 3-person panel. These are all 3 members of the medical commission. Part of the story that we didn't tell you was that 2 weeks prior, Rick was one of 3 doctors who actually sued through our foundation, the medical commissions, individually and in their professional capacity, seeking a temporary restraining order. So it's Rick, Dr. Ryan Cole, who practices in Idaho. If you've been following the COVID narrative, you know who he is and his pathology practice, which has been decimated. He had an offer for roughly $12 million and no one will not buy it, due to the black mark of him having promoted this anti-science, as they like to call it. And then a Dr. Eggleston, who's 85 years old, has a license that's active but retired, meaning he can't practice, but if he needs to practice, and God forbid another disaster, he literally just says, hey, activate me, I'm ready to roll. He was writing articles in the Lewiston Tribune, which probably has a circulation of 24 cattle and 17 people, I think. Maybe a little more than that. And the 3 of them stood up and sued the commissioners while their licenses are being held against them. Think about this. If you said, police officer, you're arresting me or pulling me over for speeding, but I got a lawsuit I'm filing right now, that's probably not the wisest thing. So anyway, we brought that, claiming First Amendment claims, and we're working our way through the courts with that. We're also going to split a bunch of the claims off and take those into state court. So I know that's not directly answering your question. So we're waiting to see how that plays out, but within probably 5+ weeks, we should have a decision. And then there's a question whether or not within 30 days we want to appeal that.
What is the appeal process look like?
The appeal process.
So the appeal process is just, once the decision comes out, we evaluate what they have decided and whether what they've decided comports with the evidence that they have. And then we take it to the superior court, which, is the regular court you would do any kind of civil suit in. And that judge will review the record we made in this case and then decide whether or not they overstep their bounds. So if we were to appeal it, likely one of the things we would appeal on would be the free speech issue. We're appealing that in Scott Miller's case, and we would likely do that here if they came down on speech issues.
Do you have any idea how many other medical professionals have had such an injustice done to them by taking away their jobs or their licenses?
Do you mean here in Washington or nationwide?
Even in Washington.
So one of the things we did in this case, which we had not done previously, is call the investigator. And he testified that as soon as the Washington Medical Commission codified I guess not codified, but put forth their position statement regarding speaking out misinformation and disinformation, right? Position statement, that he ended up with over 60 investigations. And that's just one of their investigators.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I do want to add to that that's not the same investigator for Scott Miller. And that's not the same investigator for the 4 doctors I've talked to who are under potential disciplinary action that I've met since the 3 weeks ago that we had this hearing, not ever. So, you know, you're talking about a potential of 5 to 8-fold that, which theoretically argues close to 500. Again, we don't have that evidence. We're working on, if we ever get a break from having to sue people, we'd like to focus on Public Records Acts and requesting that data from the commission itself. So that's part of that.
I do know here in town that there is one doctor who had prescribed ivermectin, got in trouble with the state, had to pay a $5,000 fine, I believe, and has certain monitoring. Another doctor had treated a patient or patients with ivermectin, received a threatening letter, and responded that I didn't know that it was a problem and I won't do it anymore, and they have dropped it. So how many people did not get treatment because of these threats that are coming to doctors?
So, Doc, I have 3 questions, a 3-part question. You mentioned that the hospital had filed most of these complaints. Were there ever any patient complaints?
That actually is in my notes to talk about, and it takes more time than I thought, and that's the way it kind of runs. So we had no patient complaints, and all of the complaints were from the hospital. One was from the husband of a nurse or somebody that works in the hospital. So there was a connection there. So there were, in fact, what I think is even more important is that during the court case, we had all of these 7 patients the complaints were made against. Either they or their family testified on my behalf, and every one of them was greatly appreciative. I mean, sometimes they were effusive in their appreciation. So to me, that is kind of the big deal. If the state comes after somebody and the people are saying, yeah, go get them, they've been horrible, then, you know, that supports the idea. But when they come after somebody that all of the people who they say were mistreated, they all come to my defense, it seems to me that's a pretty weak case.
So then the second part of the question is, the state is required to prove damage or potential damage. And they cannot prove that with ivermectin. There is no data that shows any damage at any dosage of ivermectin for treatment. How are they trying to prove or push that damage issue? Because that's what they have to use as their damage or potential damage.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that particular, but did they ever say there was damage?
So the argument they're using, and this has changed since we defended Scott Miller, the argument they're using is that by treating people early, you are causing them to delay going to the hospital. And by delaying go to the hospital, you are causing injury.
Did they show any people that happened with?
No.
Okay. And then the third part of the question is, why have medical professionals caved on this issue so badly? We are trained as scientists. We are expected to question everything. Why have we as a group caved so badly on COVID when we can look at the data and say, we know this isn't what you say it is. We knew early on it wasn't what you said it was. We knew early on that ivermectin, 700 million Indians are alive because they were treated with ivermectin early. And as a prophylactic. And yet, only in America is that truth not accepted about America and its
The West.
Yeah, it's not accepted as evidence. Why do we cave?
I don't know what the answer is. It's a good question. It's one to think about, reflect upon. One of the reasons I think it is happening is because one's paycheck is dependent upon doing what the corporation says. When my dad practiced, virtually nobody worked for corporations. It was the independent doctor. And when you're an independent doctor, you do what you believe is the right thing to do. But the hospital was given directions, and the people in the hospital system were told what to do, and do not use ivermectin. They were given that very straightforwardly. So when I become a multi-billionaire, we're going to go to work to try to go back to private practice.
I'm signing on.
I would like for that to happen. I think part of the problem, our hospital here used to be considered a really good hospital. We had a good hospital. Actually, we had two good hospitals. Today, patients I talk to, nobody wants to go there.
Go there to die.
You go there to die. People don't want to go there. What happened? Well, it got taken over by Swedish, Virginia Mason, sorry. And now it's taken over by some other. And doctors working for corporations, they don't have patients so often. I have people tell me they go in and see the doctor at the office, and this time it's somebody, and they have to look through who are you and what's your story. And then next time it's another doctor. Oh, okay, now we're going to do this. There's too much of that, and people need real doctors.
Hey, Doctor. You know, since pronouns are the most important part of our identity, a lot of these doctors identify as hospitalists. They introduced themselves as a hospitalist. I'm like, look, I'm not a medical provider, but what the F is a hospitalist, right? I've been to a doctor, it treats me in a hospitalist, but to the point, their identity is so tied to the system. They can't think outside the box, and they can't go out, color outside the lines. And, you know, fortunately, he was stuck with a lawyer that's always sucked at coloring. So, you know, the lines don't exist for me, but the picture you probably can't see. Any questions? Do you have any on Line Beach?
I did not.
Okay.
Let me see if there's any more.
I did want to say one thing, that since Scott Miller's case, I think it's apparent we've made an impact. Number one in particular, one of the commissioners was very concerned about where the line was drawn for free speech issues. That was not even a consideration in Scott Miller's case. That they didn't even think that that was an issue at all. So whether it was the lawsuit these guys filed or Scott Miller's case or whatever it was, we've made an impact there. The other way that I think Scott Miller's case made an impact was to emphasize that, in fact, ivermectin is a very safe drug. So they've had to reinterpret how using it would possibly injure somebody. So we are having an effect, because that reinterpretation of how a doctor would injure somebody by giving them ivermectin is a little bit silly. So I think that that is one thing, that by fighting these things, we are having an impact. They seem small, but I think they are significant.
And I think that's treating patients for decades with medications that are not approved for the indication that they're used for. Amoxicillin is not approved for strep throat, but we've been using it for decades to do that. Digoxin has never been approved, period, and yet we've been treating heart disease with digoxin for decades. So the state's argument in this is so tenuous that it seems like somebody really needs to jump off the cliff in regards to this and say, why are you after these people at this point?
But the unasked question that you have, your question was, why are there not more in the medical profession? The question is, why do you have 2 lawyers here? Why aren't there, of the 70,000 lawyers in the state of Washington, why are there, that we're aware of, less than a dozen? I kid you not, We've searched high and low. At one point, well, yeah, it's the money, of course, right? But the point is, if we collectively teamed up and there were 100 doctors paired with 100 lawyers in 39 counties, so 3 ahead, right? We could make a tremendous difference where they're not only getting sued in every county, they're not only getting sued in every federal district court, they're not only getting, letters. One thing we need to do, we collectively, that you all can do, is write complaints about those other doctors. Seriously, put them under investigation. Use the resources that are being wasted against you. You have a part to play. That's what the whole story of Silent Majority Foundation is. It's not us. It's the collective us. There are things that I would love us to do because we can't do it. I can either, like I said, we don't go to rallies anymore. A drive to a rally in 3 hours is 7 hours out of my day, or 3 hours out of my day, where I cannot be behind the computer or in a courtroom. We're one of 12 lawyers. Do you want us at a rally or do you want us in the court? And I'm not trying to say that we're special or anything. It's just pair us together, do your part, start complaining against the bad people. I saw a hand in that.
Yeah, what's the complaint gonna be?
That they didn't treat COVID appropriately.
Wait, what? Sorry, I missed the question.
Well, you said use complaints, and then the question is, that's a great idea, but how do you draw up a complaint?
Well,
for something
so
like that?
one complaint can easily be that if you had a loved one in the hospital and they received ivermectin, if they received remdesivir or any of the other drugs, that they did not get informed consent. That can be a complaint. And no, I can guarantee to you, essentially no one got informed consent. We got evidence of that during both of these cases that we've done. Okay, we have it directly in the medical records that they did not get informed consent. In fact, one of Dr. Wilkinson's patients actually got remdesivir when he said no.
Well, is there any way for you to file against the hospital for that?
So we are working on getting someone to do that. Yes.
Great.
But that's just one example of a complaint that can be made.
What about all the crimes that were committed against the family members of those elderly people in nursing homes?
Yeah.
We're all locked up in nursing homes for a year and a half until our loved ones passed away without any family members on it.
You have to remember that nursing homes are under the same constraints from the state. So if you sue the nursing home, you're getting nowhere because they were being told by the state you couldn't do this. So you have to find a way to relate that back. I'm not a lawyer.
No, I
But you have to find a way to relate that back to the people that are making that edict, I would think.
There's that element too, and then the question is, what negligence or other breach did they have? I would say that that's probably a bit of more tenuous. Now, there's a loss of consortium, meaning you lost the ability to interact with patient A, B, or C, and I hate to call your family members that. It's not as direct as what Karen just said, right? I didn't tell you could give me this, yet you put it in my body. I didn't tell you, same thing with your shots, or not, maybe not this crowd, but people who got the shot. Did they go through the 20-page or whatever insert? I highly doubt it. They were giving it.
You're not allowed to look at the insert.
Yeah.
I have patients that will testify to that.
And you have people who typically don't give those shots that were giving it. So there are a lot of things that we could peel the onion back, but I hate to use the war of against medicine, but this isn't medicine, right? So, yeah, got another question.
Yeah, the way it's my understanding, the inserts were blank. And to add on to this gentleman was saying about, medicines being used off label and, being safe. I got a letter back from Patty Murray in response to my objection to the abortion drug. And she claims it's safer than Tylenol.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is we argued about the off-label use and how it's commonly placed. And their claim was that he didn't give proper informed consent. And again, back to the comment, both comments, right? You know, when do you actually go and your doctor says, now, Mr. Serrano, this is an off-label use. It might have X, Y, or Z. Rarely do you hear that, and quite frankly, it's because we're visiting systematized people. So there's a lot that can be done.
So just to add to the informed consent issue, understand that under the EUA, they were required to tell you that it was an EUA drug. Okay? So if it was remdesivir, baricitinib, tocilizumab, I can name any numbers of others that I've had to work on how to pronounce them. And people were not told they were under EUA. People were not given an understanding of what that meant. So, you know, those are, I think, the informed consent issue is one of the major issues we can use against these people, because that is a negligence issue that stands outside of their liability, the fact that they aren't liable for all of this. They're still liable for that.
So I do think our time's running short, and again, we need to give a tremendous round of applause, obviously, to this man here for saving lives. And certainly to our hosts.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I give a huge round of applause to Karen for being crazy enough to volunteer. Probably not knowing what she was doing, so the sleepless nights, the crazy days, the trips to Yakima and Pasco. So I've been tremendously blessed organization to fight for people like Dr. Wilkinson. And I know Autumn wants to close us out, I believe, with a couple of words, right?
With the fundraiser part.
Oh.
Do it for Pete too, guys. Come on.
I'll let you take it.
Awesome. You guys are in a room of giants right now. I just look around and it's just powerful. And I'm sure as we heard these stories, and if you think back to what has happened the last 3 years and remember, it is heavy what was done to Americans, what was done to people in Washington State. It wasn't a light thing. This is a heavy subject. And this man right here, he took one for all of us. And it takes courage and strength, and just so thankful. And you guys, as you're sitting here hearing these stories, Eric and I listened in on one day of this trial, and I've been involved in this stuff for a long time, and I could not believe the things that they were saying. I mean, it's like watching a bad movie. This is our healthcare on the line, for not only for us, but for our kids and our grandkids. Like it is a heavy subject. And the Silent Majority Foundation is taking the fight to them. So often our side is, we're on the defense constantly. And what's different about the Silent Majority Foundation is they are on the offense, which is encouraging. That should encourage you. And you look around the room, there's probably a million stories all of us could tell about what happened these last 3 years. And all of us either have children or grandchildren, businesses that were decimated, people that we know. I know there's people in this room that lost their jobs because of the exact same things that Dr. Wilkinson is talking about today. And we all know other people who have. Tonight is specifically a fundraiser for the Silent Majority Foundation, and the work, the offensive work, that they are doing to take the fight to these people, the leftists, these people, they don't want you to have a choice. If you didn't get a chance to hear these people, I mean, I kept texting my husband. I was so angry. I couldn't believe the stuff that they were saying. Like, if we told you all of it, you probably wouldn't believe it. They don't want you to have choices. Our side, we're nice, right? We think if we leave them alone, they'll leave us alone. It's not true, you guys. It is not true. We cannot just leave it alone because they are coming for your health care. They're already doing it. They're coming for your kids. We're seeing that happen. They're coming for your guns. And the Silent Majority Foundation is like they are the tip of the spear. And so I'm asking you tonight, when you checked in, you probably all did you raise your hand if you got a text? So most of you. If you didn't, check in with PJ. It's the link to donate. And I'm just gonna give an amount here because this stuff takes funding. It's not cheap. And I just want to thank PJ, that's Pete's wife right there. And right there. What was your name? Franny. Thank you, ladies. I know you guys are the other half of the team, and it takes a lot. It's stressful, you guys. They have little kids. They are fighting for all of us, for our kids and our grandkids. So I just want to thank you guys so much. So we need $50,000. Okay, that sounds like a lot, but I know that with God, all things are possible. And I want you to think about a world in which you don't have the choice to make where you want to go for a doctor. Your child is sick, and you don't have a choice. That's what I thought about. I've got 4 grandbabies, and the thought of that, it's not okay. It's not acceptable. So I want you to think about that. Choices right here in Washington State. I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about the investment. When you think about that, the investment that you would make if you knew you could make a difference for your children and your grandchildren. It's very important. All the things that we buy that don't really matter, we end up tossing, they add up. So $500, comes and goes, but it could really make a difference for the Silent Majority Foundation for generations, for our legacy, all of us here. 500, 1,000, 2,000. If you know other businesses and people who could step into this, not all of us can be Pete and Karen. And where's Karen at? Thank you. I'm a homeschool mama. I'm graduated from being a homeschool mama, but I just love the fact that she went back to school to fight for this. That encouraged me. Thank you. So I'm asking you guys to go to this link that was sent to you. And if you didn't have it, it's silentmajority.org, foundation.org.
So it's smfjb.org is our website. However, all of you should have gotten a text message if the tickets were linked to your cell phone number. And it came from One Cause. One Cause is our donation platform that we use for the ticketing, as well as it will capture donations and information for tonight. If you have not signed in a credit card on it, you will need to do that, or you can rectify it with me later. But that is just one thing that I didn't do when I was checking in people, so we could do it quickly. You can do it yourself on your phone, or if you need me to help you, I can help you. But yeah, we just really appreciate it. We have so much work, as you've heard Pete and Karen, we're already up to our gills. We're up to our gills, and then we got Karen in Austin, and it felt kind of okay for like a month. And then we're up to our gills again, and there's just so much that needs to be done, and so much is happening so quickly. And like they said, there's a handful, 2 handfuls of doctors, or not doctors, excuse me, well, doctors too. I have a whole different situation. We have children that have specialists and very specific needs, and it's been a nightmare. But attorneys, it's hard finding them, and we are prayerfully seeking the right people to bring onto our team to alleviate the hours, I mean, we're talking 18 hours a day Karen and Pete and Austin put in collectively as attorneys. I mean, they're a powerhouse, but a powerhouse can only last so long. And your donations, what it does is it allows them to recharge while we then find the appropriate other legal people to bring on and help us and aid us, whether it be legal researchers or more attorneys or whatever it is that they're prayerfully seeking, whatever it is that God decides to put in our hands. But just know that that's, like Autumn says, it's this is something that's for the future. This is something that not only is it needed now, but it's something that we've been prayerfully seeking, and we know that it's a necessity, and it's a necessity quickly if you've seen what's happening with all of the signings lately.
Yeah. If some of you feel like we're on a precipice, we kind of are. Like we are, we're right there. It's not impossible, but it's going to take all of us. We're not all attorneys. We're not all awesome doctors, but you can donate. You can text your friends tonight. I challenge all of you, send that donation link to another patriot that you know with, you know, some personal language attached to it. Spread the word. So if you could all maybe try out that link. Does it pull up? Can someone? Yeah. Awesome.
And then check us out at smfjb.org, smfjb.org. SMF, Silent Majority
SMF.
Foundation, jb.org. Yes,
Awesome.
so however you want those last bits to mean. But that will take you right to Silent Majority Foundation's website, and has our other legal funds as well. It has the medical freedom, it has the Second Amendment, it has our Coast Guard legal fund for our Coast Guard lawsuit, just all the different funds that we utilize then into the different areas. So you can check it out, and we try to have our lawsuits up as well in the paperwork. In fact, we've got a link with Dr. Wilkinson, and you can actually see some of the case documents through our website.
You can follow their Substack, their Instagram, click on all that, share that. YouTube, do you guys have a YouTube?
We do. In fact, this will be a recorded live stream if you want to go back and watch it. It will be on our YouTube channel.
Very important. You guys, this is a fight for our livelihoods, for our businesses, for our very culture right here. So I just thank you guys so much. Thank you to the hosts tonight, Kennedy and Landon.
Yes.
And do it for your kids, do it for your grandkids, everybody.
Thank you, Adam.
Yes, ma'am.
So really quick, I do want to be respectful of the restaurant's business hours. They did close technically 7 minutes ago. So not trying to push you out, but just be